Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big guy right here. This is the KD Knives Arsen. That's A-R-S-E-N, not arson like the crime. But anyways, first off, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank Polish Custom Knives for sending this guy my way. They are not necessarily the manufacturer. I gather it's the main online retailer for KD Knives or something, but KD also goes to shows. Look, I don't know entirely what the relationship is, but this guy was sent to me by them as a review sample. Nonetheless, I told them, as always, I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. It might be a gem, might be junk. And they still did send it along. Nonetheless, though, we have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these ever, although it's made by one dude, so we kind of have to assume that anyways. And I'm doing my best not to let this affect my review. Next thing, size comparison. Not a small knife here. Here it is against the Spyderco Delica and the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. And so we can see here, this is not a big knife. I'm sorry, this is not a small knife. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. And then one other knife from Polish Custom Knives. This is the Herman Knives Dragonfly. So we can see here that that's about the only knife that's going to make this KD seem small. So there you go. That's your size. Next thing, what is KD Knives? Well, KD Knives is I gather a gentleman out of Poland. I believe his first name is Camille. I don't trust myself to be able to pronounce his last name properly. I'm still recovering from the whole Matzin swish thing. But nonetheless, I'm trying. KD Knives, though, seems to be one guy. He seems to go to shows and whatnot, or at least that's what I'm hearing. And he's actually got some prominence. He's been featured on a couple of other big channels as well. So you should check, check him out. Generally, it's what I'm doing right here. But the claim to fame here is that he's making these guys himself in his shop, and so that it's kind of cool, right? So let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. This very interesting little knife right here. So the good side to start with, this has a very solid design. And by solid, I mean a couple of things. I mean, to start with, it's a solid functional piece. I mean, look, at the end of the day, looks a lot like a pocket knife, right? But you're not going to slide up onto it. It's reasonably done. The flip tab is a little pocket pecky, but it's not too big. It's a good overall design. It works well in the pocket, but more importantly, it is a very solid feeling piece. This knife has a feeling of like solidity to it that is pretty hard to overstate. It locks open with quite the clack here. I mean, it's a very, very strong, durable-feeling pocket knife in a lot of ways. I mean, sure, it's running on bearings, things like that. I'm not saying you should baton this guy through a lock, but at the same time, you know, it's good. It's solid. I appreciate that very much. Next thing, ergonomically speaking, this is very good in the hand. It fits very nicely. The clip is well-positioned. Everything about this guy works pretty well, and you're not sliding up onto the blade because of this flip tab and whatnot. No real objections there. Next thing, clip on this guy. Clip on this guy is good. It's got a little tiny bit of cant, but in a lot of ways, it's just sort of a straight in there clip, but it's got the right amount of tension. It works well, and it's actually pretty attractively done, which actually brings us to our next point, which is that this knife actually has some very nice details to it. I'll kind of zoom in here a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. But if we take a look at this guy, what we can see is like on the clip. So the clip and the screws and the pivot and all of that, as well as the backspacer, have been anodized in one consistent bluish color, which I appreciate very much. Although actually, if we look at the backspacer on the inside, what we see is that the maker has actually done a little bit of polishing there to the very tips of the titanium, so you get a little bit more of a reflective sheen on it relative to the dull stuff that you see on the outside. So that's kind of a cool little detail there. Other kinds of cool details here are this texturing that we're seeing all throughout. We're seeing it on the backspacer here, we're seeing it on the clip, and we're seeing it kind of on parts of the handle. Not the entire thing, and I think they did a good call, or he did a good call in not doing the whole handle, because otherwise it could just look like an orange peel, right? But instead, you've got this little bit of texture here that gives you a little bit of extra purchase on this, especially as you're flipping it out to start with. That's a very nice thing. So I like this texture, and I think it's a very good mix of having a little gription to it, but without feeling too grippy, without feeling too strong, without feeling, frankly, unpleasant. So that's good. Next thing, I gotta say, this guy has a very, very nice set of chamfers. What I mean by that is that every single surface of this knife is beautifully chamfered. You can see here, nice chamfers on the inside of the handle, nice chamfers on the edges of the lock bar relief cut. I mean, every single part of this has nice little chamfers here. Even a little bit of chamfering on the inside of this. It's just good. They've put a very solid little right at the edge of the lock bar here. That's a nice little detail. A lot of little tiny chamfers along the edge of the blade as well. It shows me, and even at the flipper tab, it shows me that this guy put a lot of effort into every single line of the knife, and I appreciate that very much. Then finally, we can see that this blade has a very nice hand rub finish to it. Actually, here, I'll actually clean it up just a second with a little bit of the cleaning agent here. And that'll let me show you sort of the nicety of this. I've actually been using the knife, so, you know, hey, it's got a little bit of dirty in it. But still, what we can see here is that this knife has a very nice hand rub finish to it. You know, they're referring to it as a satin finish, and you know what? Sure, that's fine. But it is very consistent. It is very beautiful, and these tend to be very time-consuming. And one other area where the time was consumed was actually on the back of the knife, where it appears that we have a similar finish there going on, and that's a little detail that I do appreciate. Combined with all the chamfers and such, this blade finish is quite nice. So overall, I have to say, this knife is replete with little good details. I mean, those chamfers at the ends of the it's good. Even chamfers in the screw holes here. This is really, really well done. They clearly, the maker clearly spent a lot of time thinking about the exact nature of all of these edges and things. So I like that. That's good. Next thing, the blade on this guy is S35VN. Now, that's a little uncommon and when you get into this high end here, but they're saying it's run at 61 Rockwell. I don't have any trouble believing that because honestly, it's been cutting like crazy. So that's a good thing. But more importantly, it has a very nice grind to it. We can see here that this has an excellent, thin edge. This guy comes down to an exceptionally thin edge. It's got a nice sharpening choil that goes all the way to where it needs to go. This is a very nice blade with a very nice grind. So I appreciate that. Then finally, on the good side, the action is good. This is a great action. It has an absolutely smooth deployment requiring absolutely no wrist. It is a glassy smooth sort of thing. I mean, sure, it is pretty drop shotty, but it has more of a feeling of, and it's kind of hard to get at these things. Like, I suspect that a lot of folks who are already kind of experienced knife geeks already understand what I mean by this, but it's not like a super drop shot smooth in the sense that you get from like Shirogorov, Grimsmo, Koenig. Instead, it's more along the Alamic lines where it's like, there is a little tiny bit of resistance, but it's so consistent that you don't care. And it absolutely shuts just beautifully. So the action on this is very, very nice and very, very smooth. And I do appreciate it very much. I think they've done a great job here with this action, and it's something a lot of folks are going to enjoy. So to me, all of that is the good, is that this has got a very great action. It's got an excellent blade, some nice details, a great clip, good ergos, and a solid functional design. To me, the great thing about this guy that really took me a longer time to understand was just that every damn part of this is done to hit the best of his ability. Everything that he set out to do here, he did more or less perfectly. The knife itself is pretty impeccable. There's really not much that you can complain about in terms of the things that were actually done here. I mean, there are chamfers on every damn part of this. It's very clear that no surface of this knife has escaped the notice of the maker, and that's something I appreciate and something I respect very much. In finish and approach, it is an absolutely unimpeachable knife. It is pretty much perfect. And I say pretty much because I'm pretty sure maybe I've forgotten some little detail here. But you know what? In terms of what he set out to do, it's excellent. In fact, the only bad things are things that I kind of wish he'd set out to do above and beyond, or maybe skip. So, but to me, what's great here is that everything is just done really, really well. It's clear that this maker is very, very focused on providing something that sure feels a lot like a perfection. On the bad side, there are a couple little issues. I mean, to start with, one of them is that the design just doesn't feel that different and exciting. What I mean by that is not that it's a problematic design or any way, but it just kind of feels a little bit generic. It looks like if you look up, knife circa 2019 in the dictionary, this is roughly what you're going to see. It's another titanium flipper frame lock. I mean, it's good, but it's also not clear in its, it's not clear in its orbit particularly. So, it's not something that'll jump out at you in the knife case until you handle it, until you look at the details. Next thing, one thing that bothers some people, doesn't bother me, is that this has an external detent ball track. That's not something I'm particularly appreciating. Hold on. It's not like a mark or anything. It's just a little bit of extra oil there. But it does have that detent ball track that goes out past the edge of the scale. Having the handle, this knife is relatively compact for the amount of blade it's got. And part of that is because there's not much handle that goes beyond the blade there. But as a result, you end up with this external track. That doesn't bother me in the least, but I know there are some people who are bugged by it, so I figured I'd highlight it out. Next thing, the stock on this is relatively thick. I mean, if we take a look at this guy, we are looking at stock that is someplace in like the probably half a centimeter stock. That's pretty thick right there. And honestly, I don't know why it needed to be that way. The knife it cut, although it's ground well, it cut a little better with thinner stock, so it strikes me as a little weird. Next thing, the screws on this guy are free spinning. That's one thing I would like to see improved for the future. I mean, just put a D shape in there, do something, put a little ledge. I don't know, there were a lot of solutions to that, but it's not a problem we should have to have anymore. Finally, actually not quite finally, next is that this is a relatively heavy knife. You pick it up and it feels very substantial, and I mentioned earlier that it feels very solid, and so for some people that's going to feel good. But to me at least, it's a little heavy. We are coming in here at 5.02 ounces, or because it's a European knife, heck, let's just try some grams. Come on, 142 grams for what is roughly a 3.75-inch blade. So that's a little bit on the heavy side. And honestly, the other issue with it is not so much just that it's heavy, but the balance on this guy is someplace in this vicinity, which to me feels a little bit further back. I'm not a big fan of the balance on this. And so as a result, this knife is crying out for some internal milling. Just take out a little bit of weight inside this handle. That would make this knife more compelling in the pocket and more compelling in the hand. And I think it would be a little bit nicer, or just lose some weight in the blade here. That'd be good too. But it's a very heavy knife, and as a result, if you like that solidity, if you like something that feels like, then yeah, this is going to be good for you. But I tend to like something a little lighter in the weight. And then finally on the bad side, the price of this is up there. It's $595. That's a pretty good chunk of change. Given that this is one guy making these knives one at a time, I don't think it's completely out of line. It's probably not that far off what it's costing him, but it is a lot. And there are ways to get nearly equivalent quality for less cash out there in the world. So to me, what's bad is that it's about $600. It's heavy, free spinning screws, thick stock, an exposed detent ball track, which might bother some folks, and the design isn't jumping out of it's not jumping out of the catalog, so to speak. Nothing particularly ugly here, so let's go to the final conclusion, which is that this is a really nicely made knife. Look, it's got a very solid design. It's solid. It works. It's absolutely functional. It's got good ergos, a good clip, great details, a great blade, a great action, and honestly, everything he's set out to do, he's done exceptionally well. I mean, just looking at all of these 1,000 little chamfers and beautiful rounded corners, like, yeah, this is a person who cares a lot about the knives he's making. And the downsides for me are things that I wish he hadn't done, or things that I wish he had. I kind of wish the design was a little bit more differentiating, but more importantly, I wish the stock was thinner, the screws didn't spin freely, and the biggest thing is just that weight for me. I think this guy could use to lose some weight, and I mean, who am I to judge? So could I. But at the same time, I think both the pocket carry and the balance would be a little bit better if this guy were a little bit lighter. So I think a future version of this knife with a little bit of internal milling to address that would push this over the edge into incredible. As it stands, it's a very, very nice knife, but it's just a little bit like bricky, for lack of a better term, and so I'm very much hoping that that's sort of in the works. The other big question mark for a lot of folks is going to be the price. I can already hear the comment is, "No, my God, I would never pay." Yeah, we know. But nonetheless, I can hear a lot of that coming already, because at $600, this is a very expensive piece, and with S35VN, without the internal milling, I'm going to be honest, it's not all that competitive against the modern factory knife market, particularly stuff coming out of China right now. The value proposition here is not apparent. This is a knife that feels kind of like in line with some of the top-of-the-line pieces from like Rayot or Wee or something like that. And those pieces would probably be using M390. They'd probably be doing the internal milling. The difference here is that this happens to be made by one dude in Poland who clearly cares a lot about making knives one at a time. And so in a lot of ways, the value question, which is the biggest remaining question for this guy, because if you like the design, if you like the details, and you don't mind the weight, then at this point, the last question is that price. And it kind of hinges on that knowledge that this is made by one dude in Poland. Does it matter to you that this is just one person working on this entire piece rather than a larger factory doing the work? If the goal is just to find the knife that checks all the boxes, so to speak, in terms of function, in terms of materials, etc., you can definitely get better value elsewhere. But that's always the case when you're dealing with like a sole authorship knife, right? But if your goal is supporting a smaller maker and ending up with something that is exceptionally well made and where the care of the maker is very apparent. I mean, I look at this guy, it's funny, the closer I look at this knife, the more I appreciate it. It sounds silly at some level, but this knife on the table, if I zoom way out on this guy, it's not all that impressive. But when you start really looking at the little details, that's where it starts to show off. Even just the engraving of the logo here. That's where this guy really makes the most sense. So if your goal is to focus on that, if you are interested in the smaller details, if you're interested in the fact this is just a dude who made this, on his own, all of these kinds of things, and you're willing to pay a little bit of a premium for all that, for those details and for that story, then I think you could absolutely love this. And this little Arsen here could surely set your heart ablaze. Okay. So anyways, there you go. Hope this was interesting. Seriously, KD Knives, very well done. And I think a couple of little tweaks, this could be an absolute shining gem. But I'm duly impressed. Just the level of care here is pretty exceptional, and I do appreciate it. So anyways, there you go. Hope this was interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.